Hello everyone, I'm Mars. Happy to discuss financial knowledge with you again, whether it's investment banking, private equity funds, or other related topics. Today, we'll talk about a very important financial concept, NPV and IRR. These are crucial in investment banking, private equity funds, and beyond. These are concepts that are very commonly used in the finance departments of large companies. So, NPV, which stands for net present value, is exactly that, net present value. And IRR stands for internal rate of return, which is the internal rate of return. This is the cornerstone and most fundamental concept of modern finance, so we all need to pay close attention to it. So, what is NPV? Alright, let's keep it soft to learn. Let's look at a very simple example and see how NPV is calculated. Okay, suppose we invest $1,000 now. Then, 5 years from now, we'll get $2,000 back. Is this a good investment? Now, what does good mean? There are actually some very important and different criteria for this. So, what exactly is good? Generally, the most basic standard, whether it's in a company, an investment bank, or anywhere else, is the same. In a fund of funds, the NPV has to be greater than zero. How do we calculate if the NPV is greater than zero? Let's see, you invest $1,000, and in the future, you'll get $2,000. This $2,000 is 5 years from now. What is its present value? How much is it worth now? Let's calculate the PV of 2,000. Suppose your required rate of return is 10%. How is this required rate determined? That's outside the scope of today's discussion. It's also called the discount rate. For now, we won't discuss how it's set. Let's just assume it for simplicity, and we'll use a very straightforward approach. Let's look at the timeline, and we can see that we'll receive 2,000 yuan. To discount that 2,000 yuan to today, it's very simple. 2,000 divided by 1.1 to the power of 5. We've already calculated it, and it's about 1,242 yuan. So, the key question is, what is the net present value? Net present means the present value, because how much did we invest today? The investment is 1,000 yuan, which means we spent 1,000 yuan. 5 years later, we'll get 2,000 yuan. 2,000 yuan divided by 1.1 to the power of 5, well, we can clearly see that it's actually about 241.84 yuan. In other words, this net present value is greater than zero. Of course, you can see very clearly that the bigger this number, the better. So, based on this simplest standard, we can easily conclude, okay, pass. You'd say this is a good investment, as long as the NPV is greater than zero. Generally speaking, of course, you might say there could be different standards for NPV. For example, it must be greater than, say, 100. Or it must be greater than 1,000. But today, we're not going to discuss anything that complicated. In other words, as long as the NPV is greater than zero, for us, that's already the best. It means we can already conclude this is a good investment. Alright, the second method is through what's called the internal rate of return, which is an equally important concept. See how efficient your capital is. How high is the efficiency? How high is the internal efficiency? Let's take a look at what this is. What's the project's actual percentage return? Because we know that 5 years from now, we can get $2,000, okay, and right now we're investing $1,000. So, is this really efficient? So, if we calculate our efficient return in this way, what exactly is it? Of course, the return we're talking about here refers to the CAGR, okay? So, in this situation, what we can see is it's 2,000 divided by 1 plus I to the power of 5 equals 1,000. In other words, if you look at it a bit more closely, you'll immediately see that. In the case where it equals 0, if we assume the NPV is 0, what is our discount rate, right? That is, what is the value in our denominator? In other words, negative 1,000 plus 2,000, divided by 1 plus this rate to the power of 5, must exactly equal 0. The 2 in the denominator here refers to. That is, our IRR. Alright, it seems a bit complicated to calculate. It requires iteration and reverse calculation. But in the well-known Excel functions, we have the IRR function and also the NPV function. By using Excel, we can calculate it very quickly, and the answer is simple. It's 14.9%. So, it's already very clear to us. So, for this project, the actual annual rate of return is 14.9%. In fact, isn't that already higher than our required rate of return? In this case, we've already met the standard. In other words, this is a good investment. Here, with this simplest kind of accounting, let's say the criteria is good, then one very important thing for us is to look at what its most important conclusions are. What is NPV? NPV is an absolute dollar value added to wealth, meaning it tells you how much absolute value has been increased. This is the entire concept of NPV, so in most cases, and its calculation is very straightforward, because the required rate of return is usually given. Whether you're in corporate finance, investment banking, or private equity, there is generally a minimum required rate of return. They will always tell you, so once this is given, it becomes relatively easy for us to calculate the NPV. As long as it's greater than zero, generally speaking, it's considered a good investment project. Now, what about the internal rate of return? Although it's a different approach, what does it tell you? It tells you the return of this project. How high is the annual return? In fact, it's an annual rate of return. Okay, annual rate of return, right. So in this case, it's relatively a bit harder to calculate, and we also have to compare it with the original required rate of return. So you'll see, especially in corporate finance within companies, people tend to use NPV more often. Because it's straightforward and efficient to calculate, and it's easy to report to upper management. In most cases, it leads to the same conclusion, because for us, greater than zero. Okay, good. For IRR, as long as what we calculate is greater than our required return, then it's a good investment. Alright, that's all for today. We'll see you next time. Bye bye.